Okay, we're live.
Okay, so the reason we decided to have this meeting is, I was just explaining before, but I'll run through it again quickly. We were having a discussion around an OKR about performance, and that discussion originated in the infrastructure area because people often think, well, if things are running slow, it must be the infrastructure. But the benchmark that we're using to do this optimization is SpeedIndex. And I happen to be quite a big fan of it because much of it is perceived speed. And perceived speed is actually often more important than actual speed because it's how users perceive a site to be. And so I started taking a look at SpeedIndex, and I started realizing that a lot of, if we are to choose this OKR, a lot of the work is going to be on the front-end teams. And so André is the stable counterpart of the scalability team, or the front-end manager for the counterpart. So we decided to have a chat about it and discuss it before going on to the next step. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great intro.
Is that a good intro? Cool.
It's a perfect intro, Andrew. And I would have to agree. I think SpeedIndex has become a standard in the industry because it is essentially effective in measuring the user's perceptive performance. And the thing is, performance is a very complex topic that goes through many disciplines. Like it can't be just one. So I agree, it can't be just infrastructure sorting it out. And this feedback that we've gotten from the user recently is something that we have been working on and working towards improving. So the point that the area that he pointed out on the file tree, something that we have been refactoring into Vue to make it more performant. Now, it allows us to do clever stuff because performance is not just the load, it's also how you handle stuff later, how the user interacts with it, how we potentially do virtual scrolling, how we control all of that. That kind of requires us to have that part in Vue. But having said that, the way we're doing it right now, it precludes JavaScript kicking in, JavaScript running, and even in the smaller pages, like the smaller folders where it has like only a dozen of files, we still lose in comparison with competition. And I think that has to do with the fact that we are rendering everything in JavaScript, and which is not bad per se, but it does take time to put it all up. And if you do in the direct contrast with the competition that it was there on the table, I think it was you or someone identified on the issue as well, is that those competitors are doing server-side rendering, which we are not, right?
Yeah. And
server-side rendering has always been like a dream for us, but it's never really feasible. Mostly because it's something that is very native to Node servers, but we're using a Rails stack, and introducing something like that has always been like, oh, that's a big dependency to add to the project, not just because of GitLab.com, but also once you go into self-hosted instances, it's another piece of the puzzle that another cog in the machine. But in the end goal, like for us in the front end team, we've always talked about this topic as something that would potentially go somehow. But how we get to that's the big question, because then we go into infrastructure realm. Again, to your first point, this cannot be just one section tackling. Because at this point, there's some things we can improve on the front end to kind of make the score look better. And we can do some management in terms of how many data we load at a time, because we're not there yet. We just finished the refactor, the first iteration of the refactor. We want to get to a point where we don't just render the 5,000 or 50,000 files on a folder. We progressively load them. We take it easy, which is kind of the experience we've been having on the merge request. Is first we load all the data, the browser would collapse, and then we started rendering them in batches, and things got a little bit better. And we are progressively improving on that part, but it's not something out of the box. That's for the later part of the life cycle of the page, right? The rendering, which is what SpeedIndex tackles, it is being affected by the fact that we have to to load the page, you have to kickstart JavaScript, you have to start mounting the apps and the components and all that. And that's always going to be an overhead compared to server-side rendering. Like we'll never be able to catch up to server-side rendering if we don't do it ourselves.
So like a few points there. And the first one is, I really think that personally, I would, and this is something that I'm going to try get into the OKR, is I don't think we should be driven by that guy and the pages that he's chosen. And I'll tell you why, because he's promoting a product, and you know, this is totally fair. Like I would do the same. He's promoting a product that has got certain features. And so the features that he's chosen to promote are the ones that are associated, like that his product is more focused on, right? Where we've much more, you know, if you had to think about what the most important part of our product is, merge request page is probably it. And so I think we should use like a blended score across a whole bunch of pages to kind of promote like a more holistic view rather than just trying to optimize, you know, one single page. Like I think if we could squeeze a faster page render out across the entire application, that would be much better than optimizing on a single repository or a single, you know, one of the
one of the few apps,
one of the apps, yeah. And so that's the first point. And so I've started thinking about that. Oh, my headphone's about to die. The second point is that I think that where was I going with the second point? Yeah, I'll get back to it in a second. I'll remember it. Yeah, what was it again? But yeah, so the most important thing I think is we've got to kind of spread it around and kind of look at solutions. Oh, my second point was that I don't know the state of the front end code. With Gitter, that was really the last time I was like heavily involved in front end, and I know how much work it is to move across to server-side rendering. And Gitter was, when I was working on it, was all Backbone, and we invented the world's most scary, like homegrown server-side rendering on Backbone, and it was nasty, but it did make a huge difference to kind of pre-rendering pages. It really did speed things up tremendously, but it was horrible because it was always janky and breaking, but I do understand, you know, to kind of represent the entire page and get that whole thing rendered like on the server is a huge amount of work, and you know, Git is a tiny application compared to GitLab. So but I do also think that there is an argument kind of in the very long term that we should consider kind of having almost like a proxy that we could route request through optionally, that is node server-side rendering. If that was, you know, if we felt that we could get the entire application rendered server-side, then that would be something that we could possibly consider talking about. But it would, like you said, it would probably be much easier to get in if it was something that was optional rather than something that everyone had to run.
Right, that's a good point. I think if we make it optional, if we make it as an optional component, then we can potentially sell it as an optional complexity that clients can opt into, which doesn't sound bad to me, but I have fairly limited visibility to clients' needs and everything. But you did touch on a point. The way that I've seen mostly this done is like the Rails app will have a gem installed that kind of talks to that server, and then set up some binding so that it can in the views declare that you're rendering a view component, and it just renders like the server side part, and then it has a counterpart on the front end that will hydrate that and bind and attach to it. So that's how I've been seeing this mostly done. There's a second
I get it. That's clever.
And there's a second point to it, which is server-side rendering might be fast, but we still have one problem, which is if we're just server-side rendering the app skeleton and none of the data, you're still going to have to get the data. So that
was a question I actually had. Do we use Nuxt, or I don't know the view landscape at all?
Sure.
But I've seen Nuxt as something people talk about. Are we using something that kind of, I know we're using GraphQL sort of directly from client now, but are we using any sort of state management framework that would make this easier?
So we're using two state management libraries. So using Vuex, that's the one that I've been using the most for the longest time. And more recently, since we jumped over to GraphQL, we're using Apollo, which simplifies a lot of the handling of state for a bunch of cases. And we're living in this scenario where GraphQL apps, like design management, for example, they're using Apollo for state management. Older apps that are using REST APIs, they usually go for Vuex. That's kind of like the scenario. As for Nuxt, which was your question, we're not using Nuxt at the moment. On GitLab, we're using Nuxt for some documentation projects and everything, but not for GitLab itself. That was the answer.
I don't know that landscape very well, so it was more just kind of like exploring. But okay, so that's really interesting. Where was
So
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the server-side rendering, if we ever choose to go down that path, which that's what I was saying to you earlier, that it's something that's been on my mind because we're revisiting and rethinking a bit of the merge requests diffs app, which is very complex and hard to maintain and everything. And the topic came up, like, what if we could do server-side rendering for this? How would that look like? And it's something that we've been discussing, but we haven't gotten very far because we always stop at that question: is this even feasible? Can we even have a node server in our stack?
So from my point of view, I would say that if we can make it optional, and if you don't have it, you just get a blank page and it'll mount on the clients. I would be really happy to kind of help push that forward from an infrastructure point of view. I've used server-side rendering. I know that there isn't an alternative to it, right? Like, you can't build this in Ruby. Like, that is not going to happen, right? Unless you maintain two stacks and you keep them up to date. And that was kind of one of the things that we were doing a lot with Gitter. Like, sometimes someone would, because it was a super janky server-side rendering, someone would make a change and they wouldn't change like the server-side rendering. And then maybe in a merge request review, you'd go like, oh, actually these things are different. And, you might see the page will load and then it will render differently and you'll see that jankiness. And so I know the only way to do it and the only way to get that speed is to run the same code in the browser and on the server. And so if this had to be an essential part of the stack, I think we would come up against a lot of opposition. If this was something that was an optional feature, which I think a lot of people would opt for because of the performance it would give you, I think there's a really good argument for fighting for that.
Okay, I do fear for like the additional resources that this would imply for clients. But if it's an optional thing, and if we take on server-side rendering from the start, thinking that it's an optional thing, we will prepare the code so that, hey, if the app is not mounted on the server, you're going to have to mount it on the client. But if it's already there, we just hydrate it. That sounds like a good thing. And that was my second point earlier, which is whatever we do, I don't expect us to be able to grab what we have now and put it server-side rendering right from the start. This would have to be new development. Say that we have coming along or we want to adapt an existing app, there's going to be an effort of refactoring it to a shape that it can be server-side rendered, especially because of the data flow, because we have to choose for each one of the apps, what's the part that's going to be server-side rendering and what's the part that's going to be just an asynchronous request once the page loads, which honestly, if we want to get to the point of like an overall better perceived performance, this will be like the first page, so to speak, of content would come server-side rendered with data, and then would request further data from the server after the page loads. But this introduces some complexity, not complexity, but a problem that kind of made us steer away from HAML, which is the load on the server. We're looking for like 500 millisecond requests to the page of pages and servers. But now if that request is going to have to render the app, get the data from the database and push that in all in 500 milliseconds.
I know exactly this problem. This is right. So out of interest, say you server-side rendered and you effectively took a GraphQL query server-side and hydrated out the components in Vue server-side, do you then embed the GraphQL response kind of in the HTML that you send back, or is there another request that goes and kind of requeries it? Do you follow my question?
I do. So I don't think that's a fixed strategy. I guess we have some maneuverability. We can choose to, so we could do it and put it on the page so that the JavaScript can pick it up. But I think the most efficient way would be ask GraphQL for the first 5 items, for example. Render the app right on the server, push that out, and then JavaScript kicks in and requests from 5 to 100 or something, and then batches from there. I feel like that would be the most efficient because it wouldn't put that much strain on the GraphQL request. It would be faster. It would put that on the servers.
That would be an amazing kind of little project. And like, I hadn't really been thinking, like the way you've been talking is very much about like applications, which in my mind is kind of the front end is the application, right? So I'm thinking like very broad, but you're thinking very kind of like componentized.
Because that's how we do heavy apps.
One of these components, and I hadn't really considered that. So you could take one of these components and do a spike where we go quite deep. That's really, because I'm kind of still thinking of like eating the whole elephant in one bite.
Now let me explain a little bit more of the front end ecosystem right now. So if you think about the repository tree, which is what the user highlighted on Hacker News, but it's also one of the recent works we've been doing on source code. So the whole page is rendered in Rails, right? And when you get to the repository tree container, can you hear me? Yeah.
Okay.
So when you get to the repository tree container, it just happens that it's an empty div, and then the JavaScript will just bind to that div and then kickstart a view app there. There might be other view apps in other parts of the page, right? And those will kick off independently. Sometimes they will share state. Like, for example, on the merge request page, we have the discussions app and the divs app, and they share a state. But they're all kind of independent, and each page at GitLab might have 1 to 3 to 4 view apps on their own, with their own individual state management, with their own individual network requests. So that is something that we have currently across GitLab. So we don't have a single page.
Will that add a lot of complexity to something like this? Like, as opposed to if there was like a single kind of application on each page, do you see like having to load multiple applications being more complex, or is it not really going to make it more complex on its own?
That's a great question. So what I see there is that we will probably have a little bit more be more careful. Because each of the view apps being server-side rendered, triggering requests to database will make the page load slower. But I think from the moment that server-side rendering is a conscious thing, once we make our view app opt into server-side rendering, performance is already in our heads, right? So I would say for the beginning, say that we turn on the key for server-side rendering, none of the view apps have been opted in, nothing changes, I would expect. And then I go into one of the pages that have 3 view apps. On the first view app, I say, all right, that will be server-side rendered. That alone will be the weight on the server response. The other 2 will be no weight because they will just be kicking in JavaScript. So I think the complexity is there, you're right. But I think we'll be consciously opting in each view app into it.
That's super interesting. I mean, like, it kind of feels like it's something that is not as far away as I felt it was at the beginning of this conversation. And certainly, like, you know, I'm a Node fanboy. Like, I've never made I've never hidden that away. I think it's a fantastic, you know, especially for like, I genuinely feel like for this type of technology where you want to pre-render on the server, there is no alternative. It's not even like you can't beat it. There is simply no alternative to it.
We can have bindings on the Rails side that talk to that very easily, but you're right.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, it's something to discuss. Sort of, I just want to kind of touch on a few, like, because that's still, I don't know if that's going to be like a 1/4 OKR tangible goal. So there's a few things that I wanted to kind of also bring up. The one was that, you know, we've moved across to Cloudflare, sorry, not CloudFront, Cloudflare in front of the whole application now. And I don't know if we've done an audit of how well we're caching our client-side assets, and if there's like a win. So there's a few things. The first one is the caching. The second one is how much do you know of, are we kind of breaking our JavaScript up into async loaded modules? Obviously, please forgive me because my front-end tech is like, what, 3 years out of date now. So you're gonna have to kind of forgive me.
No worries.
But you know, one of the things that we were doing with Gitter was, you know, taking this big chunk of JavaScript and kind of asynchronously loading it in the client as we needed it. And are we doing that here? Are we doing it to the right degree?
So
is there a way that we can get there?
I can remember exactly if Gitter is more of an SP but is it most of an SPA, or do you just have normal page reloads and stuff?
It's an SPA. It's all once it's loaded, that's
a different nature, because in GitLab we have mostly just like page reloads, and once you get, except for the Web IDE, for example, that's kind of like are most similar to an SPA, which is everything is a Vue app. But to your question, we do have the bundles are splits, so we have code splitting, so that we're so if you go to one page, you're not loading everything on the other page. And we're looking right now heavily into the topics that you just mentioned, like how big are these bundles? Can we bring them down? And that is on the newly formed front-end foundation team that is led by Lucas IP. And I think that would be a great topic for you to bring up with him, because he's looking into that topic specifically now about the sizes of the bundles, and the caching goes hand in hand with it. So I would set up a conversation.
I had a question about that as well that I'll bring to you, but it sounds like Lucas is the right guy to talk to. The question is, and this is also just from experience with Gitter, as we increased the number of deployments we did a day, we were changing hashes on JavaScript bundles that were not changing. And we were invalidating all of those caches. And that was like a huge performance loss. And one of the things that I always wanted to do, and we might have even got it done before I start focusing on it, but was to keep those hashes consistent and the cached bundles consistent across deploys, which is not as trivial as it seems. And the same thing's happening at GitLab, right? We're deploying more and more frequently. And if we are throwing away what the browser has in its cache because we've done a deploy, we're losing a lot of performance there as well.
So aren't those hashes controlled by Rails?
So I mean, we had we built all of this before there was a lot of tooling. Like Webpack was adopted quite late on, and you know, it wasn't there in the beginning. But
you have a great point.
Certainly for us, it was a bunch of work to do that. You know, if Rails and Webpack are kind of working together to give you consistent bundles that are also cacheable across deploys. Obviously, if nothing's changed in that bundle, then that's great. But it's something that I'll take a look at, like, and just try and view.
Yeah, that's a great topic. And so it's basically we're invalidating all the bundles, even if they haven't changed. I'm not sure if you're doing it,
but it's worth checking.
It's worth checking for sure, in both on the Rails and on the Webpack side, for sure. I would bring that topic to Lucas as well for the front end. For the back end, then I'm not definitely the right person to help. But I feel like that would be a good win if we're not doing it, for sure. The same thing for caching. And the splitting, we're looking at into deduplicating some data that is going into. So for example, I noticed he mentioned that some of the emojis are being called by a bunch of bundles. So we can totally improve that part.
And you know, some of it is like the network download time, but equally it's about the compile time, right? So you're trying to, like, if there's functionality that people don't need at page load time, you know, get it out of that first like synchronous load and into, you know, so if there's, I don't know, like a button that you click 1/5 of the time, then, you know, async load, whatever the functionality there is. But obviously I understand that the decisions are very different when you're building an SPA.
I don't think we'll do that a lot, I'll be honest, about fetching data upon a user's action or something. Because most of the scenarios that we have they're just going to be reloading the page, except for example, the merge request diff. It's like a big app, has a bunch of interaction. But for example, say that I was only going to load the data, the assets for the batch comments, like the merge request reviews once they click. If the bundle was already cached from the get-go, then loading them asynchronously would be just another extra time for the perceived performance that would make the interface slower. So I definitely delegate or defer that to Lucas on how we're handling the bundles, and definitely we're all part of it, but we're not building an SPA. That's my bottom line.
So related to that, but slightly different, do we have a vendor bundle?
Oof.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Like
just the external plugins and stuff?
So yeah, so we had this with sorry, I'm using a lot of Gitter stuff. Back in Gitter days, but it is an easy win, right? And so you take, I don't know, whatever we use, Vue. I'm going to use a bunch of old names to show you how dated my JavaScript is. You know, Vue _ Backbone, all of the libraries, right? Like I'm going to say jQuery because we probably still got some jQuery in there somewhere, right? And you put all of those things into a bundle. When a page loads, it loads 2 JavaScript bundles. It always loads synchronously 2 JavaScript bundles. The one for, you know, that's got that, and that's common across all pages. And it's obviously compiled once for every page.
Yeah.
And so you're not kind of mixing that in, and you save a lot of network traffic, and you also save a lot of compile time. And the other thing that's really important about it is, once you get the caching across deploys, that bundle is very static. It hardly ever changes.
Right.
And so, you know, people using the site a lot, it just saves a bunch of time.
I think we do. I'm taking a look right now at the Webpack vendor. We have a Webpack vendor config, and I think that's exactly what it's doing. It's
that's
grabbing
exactly
jQuery, PDF.js, Core.js, eCharts, Lodash, underscore, a bunch of things. They're all there. So I think that's what we're doing. Cool. But definitely something to keep in mind. When you bring up with Lucas. In terms of actionable things for the OKR, is there anything else that we need to discuss at this point? Because I feel like
we're
looking at a bunch of things.
Kind of important. And so Josh has proposed a SpeedIndex of 1,000, and I think it's personally, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. I think it's way too optimistic. It's basically halving the speed index of the sites. And I think we should, you know, like Sid says, OKR should be 70% probability of achieving them. I kind of get the feeling from everything I've looked at, and I need to quantify this a lot more, before I sort of propose anything, but I get the feeling that I don't think that we will be able to do that, you know, without server-side rendering. With, you know, what we can tweak now is some optimizations around page load times, around caching, maybe around these bundles, but I don't think we're going to halve the speed index of these pages.
Yeah, that's so the thing about the speed index is that we're working with time, and if we find clever ways to bring, and again, speed index is a kind of mix between the perceived performance on the viewport, right? And a lot of the things we've done successfully in terms of performance have been delegating the heavy loading for later and stuff like, hey, if it's below the fold, the user is not really caring about that, so we can just not load it right away. We load it later. We definitely are very mindful of the problem of, for example, people using the native find functionality on the browser. So we don't want to just like stop rendering everything, but we can delegate it for a second request. And that will essentially make that much faster. And I can give you the example of the merge request page on the diffs that we recently did a work where, you're still from that time, but there was a time when we refactored into Vue, we had one diffs JSON request for the whole page. And now we broke that off into 2 kinds of requests. One is the metadata of the diff, and the other is the actual content of the diff. The difference on this on the UI was enormous, because basically we start showing the tree almost instantly, where before we have to wait for the whole diffs to load to even show the tree. What I'm saying is it doesn't feel impossible if we focus on that. So it feels like halving. Because 1 second, if we get the data from the server,
Yeah.
if we get the page rendered very fast and then we immediately trigger the first request that we need, render it right away, and then load it later, the rest, I feel like we might be in a position to halve that. And again, I always like OKRs are very ambitious.
Yeah.
So I feel like that would be a good metric to go for. I would love for us to keep the topic of server-side rendering in flight and investigating that, but I'm not sure if a quarter is time to get that rolled out.
Yeah, but it's something to start thinking about, and like
POC.
You need an infrastructure supporter on that. It's going to be me because. But yeah, Node's a beast. Like it's great for certain things, not everything. The final thing that I just wanted to kind of bring up was that this whole little exercise has brought up, and I know we're over time, has brought up that the front-end team have got kind of their own little silo of metrics, which is great. Like I'm really happy that this has been set up, and that's the SpeedIndex. The part about it that I maybe would like to iterate on is that it would be really good if this was in Prometheus and we had the same kind of monitoring and like eyeballs on it from our side as well. We have a lot of kind of second order metrics. So we have stuff like, is the web server functioning within acceptable latency thresholds? But then we also have second level metrics, which is like how much of the time is each component within the system within its thresholds. And so then we're having these second order with the front end SpeedIndex stuff being in a different sort of place. You can't do any of that stuff. And it's very petitioned. I was vaguely aware of it, but I'd never really dug into it. And so I would really like to kind of look at bringing this into Grafana and having like a single set of metrics, but that's probably, I don't know. I've got to propose something. But
so when you say the metrics that you're talking about, which metrics are you talking about? The front end?
So is it the SpeedIndex measurements site? That's let me just go.
Because I was just doing the historical records for this, and we did use something that is within Grafana. Let me just take a look.
Yeah, it's tricky because it's in Grafana, but it uses a different backend. So it uses a graphite backend, which is a bit confusing, but it's kind of like a different bunch of technology for that. The
for
things that we can do,
or for collecting or for displaying?
For storing. But it's kind of like a different, it's not the technology that we have our alerts on and that we're kind of using on a day-to-day basis. Graphite's, it's like a different stack, right? And I went and looked through, they don't support Prometheus. And so it's kind of tricky. I think what might end up happening is that it might just be easiest to run the two alongside one another. So almost set up like I've got a tool that I built like years ago for GitLab that actually exports the same metrics, the SpeedIndex and all of that into Prometheus. But what I want to do is I want to have like really good metrics, and I want alerting like that, we get alerts. The front end is really slow. We've gone above this threshold. And so there's a whole bunch of, after kind of saying that I think we've got enough tools, I do think there is work that we can do on tools, but that is just to kind of help us improve. We do have a lot of data about the things that we can fix already, especially on the front end.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me, and unifying them, I'm all for it. I'm definitely not the best person to talk about that particular project. I think Jose was involved on it from the start, Tim as well. But
he's still involved in that.
I don't think it has an actual owner, but I think he would be the person to talk to. So just to make sure that we're on the same page, this is what I'm talking about, right? This is the metric we're looking for that we usually use, and it has a bunch of pages and all that. Okay.
So this is it's got a sort of snowflake backend of graphite, and the only things that graphite has got in it is these metrics. So we can't kind of integrate it. So with the rest of our dashboards, it's all managed in Git now, and we can't really get the graphite stuff in there in the same way. It's not really compatible without a lot of work. So
Sounds like a
something
good.
I'm kind of thinking about it. There's a little bit more to it. I'll just quickly, I don't know if you got a meeting now, or if you.
No, I'm free. So feel free to go ahead.
So what I've been kind of thinking about with it is kind of as a first step. So I'll just give you a list of tools. So we've got Google have got their SpeedIndex or whatever. They've got a separate SpeedIndex tool. I forgot what it's called now. A page speed. So we've got page speed. We've got SpeedIndex. We've got something else called a black box exporter, which is something else. We've got something called Pingdom, which is another tool that we use. And we've got all of these things, and they're all monitoring slightly different but slightly similar URLs.
Right.
And like we can't do a lot of analysis because they're all kind of similar but different. And so what I've been trying to think about is like, can we take all of these, and then there's all these URLs that this other guy is monitoring, which I think we should monitor just to have, so we don't get any surprises from his system, so that we can start alerting on, if the URLs that he's monitoring suddenly double in speed, we don't want him to kind of put out something on Hacker News. It'd be better if we can just like respond to that straight away. And so I've got those URLs. And there's lots and lots of URLs. And so I've kind of built up this thing where we've got all the different tools, and we can export the URLs, for SpeedIndex, for Pingdom, for black box exporter, for the Google page index or page speed exporter, all of these different tools. And what I could do with it is I could tag each one of these things with a feature category. So we could say that the tree view
Source code
index is source code, and kind of do it that way. And so we can start trying to get some attribution on it as well.
That'll be perfect.
So that's just something like, it's a bit of an arbitrary thing, but it's like, I think we don't have a lot of like real user monitoring or synthetics or anything like that. And it's kind of like a first step towards that at the moment.
That sounds great, Andrew, because I'm just sending you a link on chat, because we're doing the management of the URLs that get grabbed onto that site speed through that repo. And it seems very similar to what you're doing. We have a distinction between logged in URLs and not logged in URLs so that we can access.
I took a whole bunch of the URLs from there. So I stole all your URLs and I put them in. And so what I would like to do is generate those lists that you use there in this tool, and then maybe export it across or something like that. But,
great. But unifying the tool sounds great. I definitely support that effort, but I'm not the right person to help figure that out for sure.
Fair enough.
But definitely talk to Jose. He'll probably get you on the right track.
Awesome. Okay. I've been working with him on all the dashboard stuff that he's working on. So he owes me like a half an hour call.
Awesome.
Which is good. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Anything else, Andrew, that we need to talk about?
No, that's amazing. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
How do we get this? How do we get the server-side rendering, like long-term discussion going? That's the last thing.
I think I would just create an issue for us to start getting out the details, because out of it, I would love for us to grab one project, one app.
GitLab or somewhere else?
GitLab or GitLab. Yeah, I think that's the best one, because we can grab one of the candidates to be like the proof of concept, and we can run a proof of concept for it. And I'm all for it, doing these experiments. So if we need to get someone on the source code team to work on this as a deliverable, I'm all for it. You have my support. So I feel like that would be the greatest candidate, something in source code to get experimenting with the server-side rendering, and the file tree, the repository file tree seems like the greatest candidate, because it's simple. It doesn't have a lot of interaction, but we need to be super snappy. The other aspect we didn't cover, by the way, Andrew, is that one thing is performance of rendering the page, right? Doing it very fast, but then performance of interactions. So once you traverse the file tree, you go from folder to folder to folder to folder. That is not being tracked, I think, anywhere. But it is something that improved significantly once we did this refactor. So the page load was kind of like the same, but moving from folder to folder were like 500% faster.
Just to confirm, there's no push state happening on that, right? That's like just good old-fashioned navigation?
Now there is. Now there is.
Oh, there is. Okay.
Now
Awesome.
there is. Before we didn't have that. It was just a haml, render a new page. And now once we introduce the Vue app onto the repository, it just updates the page and pushes states onto the URL. Yeah.
Oh, that's also, I wasn't even aware of that. That's awesome. Yeah, because that makes, so in effect, we do have like little mini SPAs, right?
That's the thing. We do have, yeah.
Like anything that's got push states is an SPA.
So I can tell you that there's like so we can track those because those are usually the ones that have the router handling it on the front end. So we have a Vue router, and only if a handful of applications have a Vue router installed. That's one of them. The other is the design management, which is like the design tab on the issues. And there's not much else that has it. So that's what I'm saying. So there's a couple of apps within our ecosystem kind of SPAs, but none of them warrant that extra module loading asynchronously because the code is pretty much the same.
So what we did, and back in the days of Gita, but what we did was, it was very important for us to have channel switches optimized, right? And as soon as that got slow because of something in the application, we would hear about it and people would complain, and so that was critical to us. So we built up a very small piece of infrastructure that was kind of like start of operation, like it was just an API, and you could say start of operation, end of operation, and then what would happen is we'd use the send beacon API to send those back to the server. You know, so even if you changed page at the end of it, it would still, you know, the browser make sure that it go back. And then on the server side, we basically had a very simple RESTful endpoint because you don't have much control with send beacon. It's just a post. And we would take that, and all we do with it is drop it into our metrics platform, which was Datadog there, but it's no different. The technology will be exactly the same. And so that was a critical metric to us, was that page change. It was like literally from click all the way through to everything rendering to the page is, the new room is ready. And then we ended up using the same kind of pairs of, you know, start, stop in other places. And that might be something we could consider doing because, like you say, you actually want to record from the beginning of the action till the end.
Yeah, so I'm glad we had this conversation because a week ago I had a conversation with Dennis Mishinov, and he's looking into using this user timing API to do this. So basically, it's a native API. You know about this?
Yeah, no, we inside our one we did these marks as well, and they're super useful.
Is this what you're talking about?
The only problem with that is that it doesn't send it back to the server. That on its, well, at least last time I looked, it was
on its own. No, yeah, definitely not. Yeah, we're looking into first tracking. So I think the first one is finding out how we're going to use them and make the entire front end team use it on their own apps, and then having some way to capture that onto the server for sure. It's going to be a second conversation.
What we did, this is just like a little thing to kind of look at or experiment with. We did some stuff with kind of hacking Webpack, and maybe this is a better conversation to have with Lucas again, but we had it that we had two compiles, a debug compile and a non-debug compile, and that's all those performance marks and the console logs and everything basically resolved down to nothing in the production compile, and in the debug compile they were all in there. So
that's amazing.
Yeah,
we're going to go through that because we've been talking about that topic, and it's something that we would love to have some things available to debug applications, some things not, but okay. But whatever comes out of that.
You have a module that exports like all the functions, like you know, obviously it's just a tiny wrapper around the mark function, but it's our own one. And then when you, in the sort of production build,
you check the flag.
You substitute that with a different module that's just empty functions.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Like, it's simple to do.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So whatever comes out of that effort, I feel like we're going to tie into that, and we're going to keep talking about how to store that into the right metrics bucket kind of thing.
Yeah, in fact, if you have a wrapper around performance mark that you can get out, you can also have one that does a send beacon on it or whatever. But yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Cool. I think we're done for now. Do you want me to create the issue for the SSR to start the discussion? Do you want you to start?
I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
Unless you
Ping
want
me on it. Ping me on it so that then I can push it on the front end side and do our diligence.
Yeah, brilliant. You have to forgive if I'm using very old-fashioned JavaScript terminology. But
Andrew, you know what? I come from a time where JavaScript wasn't even a thing, and I keep seeing. So we went through all those stages of unobtrusive JavaScript, making sure that the page that is there, and then we just go and hide it. We did this in 2003. Right.
Yeah, I know.
The thing is, the industry went far out into the JavaScript spectrum, but the concepts like the browser, the timing, they're still the same. The HTTP is still the same. So all that knowledge that you gathered, I feel like is still very useful these days. So don't feel embarrassed by bringing that up. I think it's very valuable.
Cool. Excellent. André, have a good day.
If there's anything we need to discuss again, pull me in. I'll happily jump in, but I'm going to be pushing that on the issue. Thanks, Andrew.
Awesome. Have a good one. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Bye-bye.